Welcome to Endless, a Sandman podcast from Chipperish Media. I'm story expert and chessboard Lani Diane Rich.
And I'm writer, erstwhile DC Comics editor, and weirdzo Alisa Whitney. Today on Endless, we're going to be talking about Sandman Volume 5, A Game of You, Chapter 1, from the Sandman comic book series.
A Game of You, Chapter 1, was written by Neil Gaiman, drawn by Sean McManus, colored by Daniel Vazzo, and lettered by Todd Klein. This issue was edited by Karen Berger, assisted by Alisa Whitney, cover by Dave McKean.
The children of the Cuckoo know you. Yes, we know all about you. Time to wake up. In A Game of You, Chapter 1, we are flung into a forbidding snow-covered landscape in the middle of what sounds like an epic fantasy. Luz and Prinadu, unseen, discuss the disappearance of the Tantablin, and we see the hacked-open, charred remains of a dead person, Goblin, holding a scroll. The children of the Cuckoo, we are told, threaten this land and all its inhabitants. We enter a cave, and as the unseen Wilkinson makes the snarky noises of a cynic on the outside, a heroic Martin Tenbones tells the others he will seek a mysterious she who alone has the power to save them all. He will seek her in her other world. That other world, it transpires, is New York City, where Barbie, the bubbly blonde from the doll's house, is now living. No longer so bubbly, and no longer with Ken, and no longer able to escape into the high fantasy epic dreams we glimpsed during the Dream Vortex crisis of the previous series. Barbie's neighbor Wanda, who appears to be nearly 6'4" and has an Adam's apple concealed by the high neck of her black bondage gear-inspired outfit, invites Barbie to shop. Waking the sleepy Barbie requires coffee and a search for milk, which leads Wanda to visit her neighbors. Bespectacled, primly dressed Thessaly, short-haired, terse, cigarette-smoking, tie-wearing Hazel, and platinum-spiked hair, archly sardonic Foxglove, who delivers the goods. The one neighbor Wanda does not ask, nerdy and socially awkward George, passes her on the stairs with a disapproving scowl. Served coffee, Barbie makes herself up in a half-faced chessboard, and off they go. Meanwhile, in the dreaming, Morpheus and Matthew discuss the dying pangs of a distant islet or skerry on the far shoals. They discuss the promise of grief ahead and the shiver of transition when a being passes from one state of existence into the other. So, what are you going to do about it, boss? Asks the Raven. Morpheus replies, why should I do anything about it? In the subway, Wanda and Barbie encounter a woman begging for money. She becomes petrified when she encounters a small dog and runs from the train, car, and the subway, only to see an enormous shaggy gold canine the size of a truck. This is Martin Tenbones, injured but undeterred, and we are thrown into his POV as he searches for Barbie, the princess he calls on to give him courage as he braves the fast, hard things that have left him wounded and bleeding. Barbie is just around the corner, and we watch with real tension as the police prepare to kill what they assume is a dangerous beast. Barbie, half her face a chessboard, has already lost this opening game when she rounds the corner and witnesses the police killing her heroic dream companion. As the dying Martin finally sees his princess, he tells her to take the porpentine, a jeweled pendant on a chain as it happens, and begs her to fulfill her quest. Collapsing from shock and grief, Barbie is helped back into her room, where she is briefly attacked by a flock of dark birds that vanish like dream visions. Huddled in fear, trying to separate dream from reality, she does not register her nerdy neighbor George, who inquired with meek nosiness after her well-being when Wanda first brought her home. But George, like all the others in this house, is not who or what he appears to be. Sitting on the stairs outside Barbie's room, he takes one of the dream birds in his hand and then swallows it whole like a snake, while it calmly consents. Returning to his own room, where a poster of Barbie appears to be the only decoration, he reveals himself, one of the children of the Cuckoo. Like Martin Tenbones, he has crossed over into our reality, but unlike Martin, he is alive and well, and his mission is not to help Barbie.
Oh my God, Alisa, I can't believe we're back. It's been so fun. I'm so excited to get started on this again with you and to start on Game of You. Now, one of the things, from the start, Game of You was the volume that everybody talked about. Game of You was the volume when you asked Karen Berger in your interview with her what her favorite one was. She was hard pressed, but she picked Game of You. So I've been waiting for this for such a long time, and this is your second volume. So you were, in your seat, you knew what you were doing. You weren't a newbie to the process anymore. You were working on it. I've been really, really excited to read it. And I was a little worried because I was like, you get really excited about something and then you're like, it doesn't live up to those expectations. And expectations can completely ruin, expectations are the thief of joy, right? So I start reading this and I'm like, gosh, I hope this stands up to my expectations. And I have to say, it exceeded them. It's such a great start. It's a banging start to the new volume. Barbie was not the character I was most interested in Doll's House. But already here, I'm much more interested in her. I love Wanda. I love that relationship. I love the complexity with which this is written. I love the reality of the world of Martin Tenbones and the Porpentine and the land and all of that. I love the crew of characters that we have kind of sort of narrating all the disaster. We're going to die. I'm cold. I love all of that. It's really intriguing. I don't know what's going on yet, but I'm in.
Yes, I'm also very in. It's so interesting to me. I mean, for me, this is really when, as you say, I was in the thick of the creation of this. I wasn't brand new coming to work every day thinking, oh my God, they're going to figure out that I don't know what I'm doing. And I was just very much in the thick of my time at Vertigo. Neil and I were spending a lot of time talking. At this point, we knew each other a bit. For me, this is almost like revisiting a childhood fantasy. The 90s was a fairly long time ago now. And, so I look back at this and can really feel the memories coming back. That said, I also feel a resonance for me with this storyline. I think, it has famously been discussed that Season of Mists was, I think, the most popular fan favorite immediately. And Neil has said that it tickled fans where they wanted to be tickled. And this is different. I think in many ways it is one of the most complex storylines. Neil himself has said it's this one of the storylines that he thinks was the most successful in the sense that as a writer, we set out to do things and he had the sense that it accomplished what he had set out to do. But I think that there are ways in which the goth splendor of Season of Mists really spoke to me in my, late 20s and early 30s, all the sibling stuff. This found family, and this exploration of gender and identity and the fluidity and weirdness of identity. This is more resonant to me as a woman in, her 50s. Mm-hmm. And so I'm feeling both nostalgia and a kind of recognition of oh yes, this story speaks to me in the here and now.
I love it. I love that it is examining all of these kind of identity things. We've got a lot of different kinds of people. We have Barbie once again in a household community, which I think is honestly the way that we're supposed to be living. That's another topic all entirely. But I love that there is this sense of family and community within the home space, which I really love. And then, of course, we've got this element of intrusion and evil within that safe space, which is not quite as safe as we hoped it would be. Love all of that. I love there's just a couple of things that I'm picking up, here she has a chessboard on her face, but only on half of her face. And it's called a Game of You, and I have no idea what that means. I'll figure it out, I guess, as we go, or maybe I won't. Maybe it's an ambiguous title. I don't know. But I kind of love that in the opening, we have her dressing as a game, right? And then that game falls off her face as she loses Martin Tenbones. She's crying, she's distressed, and it just sort of melts away. I love the way that speaks to identity. You know me, we've had this discussion a million times, and I think this may be part of the reason, among many reasons, why Sandman has been such a delight for me, is that give me an identity story, man, I'm in. I love it.
Yes, and I am going to talk a bit more about the title in, I think it's in Lucien's library.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some interesting behind the scenes stuff with that. Yeah, I think it's also interesting because to me this ties in with a certain theme of split New Yorks. We've got the cover, the Dave McKean cover. It's split in half. We've got a game of you in this bold, Courier typewriter kind of font over the New York skyline, which is a really iconic skyline. And then you've got the lower half. You wrote about it so, beautifully about, do you want to say more about the cover and how that captures the dual narrative?
Yeah, this is McKean's cover. The top half, we've got that skyline. There's a red sky, which insinuates danger, coming, and blue water. And the thing is that the water itself can be dangerous, but it has this feeling of blue calmness. And it's the only spot in the cover that has that sense of calm. The lower half of the cover has these three people in shadow, two whose faces we can see, all smoking over this warm, grungy background, where we see what looks like a building with a fire escape. Sometimes I don't see things properly. I don't know the context and I just assume it's something. But we've got a little tiny, little black cat watching, which I love because that feels like Sandman. And we're going to talk a little bit about the role of Sandman in the bigger story and Morpheus and what he does. And the word you, written in the upper right corner of that bottom half, but it's written in a way that feels like it's scratched in and revealing light, which is something that I absolutely love about the way that Dave McKean works with mixed media and light. And, one of the faces that we can see it's split in half, and one side is noticeably larger than the other, and it like gives that sense of a split identity, which I really, really love.
And there's actually... There's like three aspects of the face, which I think I think this theme of maiden, mother, and crone that comes in a lot into Sandman is going to be touched on. Mm-hmm. But I also thought how there were movies in the late 80s and 90s that had this sort of dangerous subterranean bohemian New York beneath the current one. I think that's a little less. I think the subterranean New York has been outsourced to Brooklyn and Kingston, New York these days, and other places. But I think that this is evoking some of that for me too. And it's interesting because we've got the whole New York aspect, but this is very definitely not an urban fantasy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. It doesn't feel like an urban fantasy. It has this like straight fantasy feel. When you have Martin Tenbones wandering through the city of New York with his, and again, I love the lettering. I love the way in comics you can feel the voice, and the voices of all the people from the land are in this kind of sort of medieval, archaic, calligraphic sort of, feel to that lettering.
That you can still read because Todd Klein, the letterer, is a genius. It's just
it's amazing.
He's
and the
won every award.
Okay, can I just say how much I appreciate Todd Klein for the different colors indicating who is speaking? Like, because sometimes when you have boxes like that,
that's Danny Vazzo.
Oh, that's Danny Vazzo because he does the colors. I love everything. Everybody as a team.
It's such a team effort. No, there's so much, but the colors, that would be Danny Vazzo helping. We used to have a saying back in the day when things were a little unclear or there was a problem. It was always like, well, color will fix it. It
color
was kind
coding.
Of the standing
absolutely
comic joke. But so and I think that, New York itself, the New York of the 90s is part of my nostalgia here as Wanda smokes in restaurants. And I think that for all that New York has changed, it's still a place where strangers can become neighbors and neighbors become friends. And it is a place where multiple planes of existence coexist. You've got the tourist Manhattan and the blue collar Manhattan. You've got historic Manhattan and the little clues there. And, you've got the high fashion Manhattan. And so... But what's crossing over into this is really high epic fantasy. This is, Narnia and Oz and all of those, high epics seeping into the, the 90s New York City.
Yeah, no, I love that. And again, like we do have, just kind of this theme all the way through of these split identities and of the complexity of characters being more than one thing, which is something I think that we struggle with. We look at something and we say, this is this, and we want to categorize everything, and it can't be quite that easily done. And when you have this crash, this transition, from these spaces of being where Martin Tenbones manages to go and find Barbie in this city. So he is in a place where he doesn't belong. She is not in the place where she belongs, which is her dreams, which is something else that I think is really interesting here. It's just, there's so much cool stuff going on. And I've only read it twice, or actually 3 times in preparing for this, because I'm going in as cold as I can. I do have some sense of what's going on, but not a whole lot. And that cold reading, I feel like I've been able to taste the beginning of the flavors, but there's so much more complexity going on underneath. I'm really excited to move forward with all of that and kind of see where all of those dual identities and triple identities and all of that kind of exist.
Yeah, I was looking back. So I have a few different versions. It's so sad. I think I got rid of most, if not all, of my floppies. Mm-hmm. The original comics in a move, more than 10 years ago. But I have the original trade paperback from, I think it was 93 when it was collected. And Samuel Delany, the science fiction writer known as Chip Delany, does this amazing intro in his High Bender and Sandman companion. Neil talks about that. Both High and Neil talk about it because it's really worth revisiting. Chip is such an amazing critic and analyst of literature. And he talks about the parallels between the fantasy saga and the real world drama in the series. It's something, just to sort of keep your eyes out for the ways, Wilkinson, who's our snarky rat-like guy in the trench coat. He later talks about details about his family and names that has a resonance with what Wanda reveals in this issue about the name she was given at birth. Family attitudes towards names. Barbie's later going to talk about makeup versus tattoos in terms of body art and being fluid in her personhood. So I think that they're just be on the lookout, for anyone who's reading along with us, that there are subtle and not so subtle resonances and rhymes in how these two narratives are taking place.
Yeah. Barbie, covering half of her face I got to put my makeup on, but the makeup isn't what we expect, especially from a character named Barbie who was with Ken and is evoking that sense of Barbie womanhood, right? Which is kind of the imposed gender expression of femininity in a toy that we were all, I don't know, everybody I knew had a Barbie. Every girl I knew had a Barbie. And we were all kind of given that as some kind of indoctrination of femininity when we were young. And here we have Barbie, who is kind of pushing back against, you never had a Barbie with half a face was a chessboard. We never saw that, So I really kind of love using Barbie.
Existential Barbie.
I love it. But we really, we've never had a representation of Barbie that kind of flouts those expectations of who and what she is. When back in Doll's House, we saw her, tramping around the land with Martin Tenbones and having all of these adventures where she is the princess, yada, yada. It was just like a dream that she was having, and it kind of made her look like the very princess that we would expect her to be. But here we have kind of a flouting of all of those expectations, and she is more than all of that, and she is unexpected things. And I have the anticipation that I am going to see a lot more unexpected things from Barbie, which I really love.
So you noticed, Lani, that Sean is not listed as penciler or inker, but just as artist, and that is Sean is both penciler and inker. And I think his artwork here really gives a playfulness and almost a childlike, children's book illustration quality to some of the panels. And yet the expressiveness of the faces really, helps deliver the drama. And, I mean, I think of Martin Tenbones and that whole dramatic death scene. I definitely feel the grief. And he also is able to show a darkness. This is, it's got a cuteness and a darkness. And I think that, so many of these panels are just really beautiful. Neil chose him because of his work on Swamp Thing 32, Pog. And that was, again, so Neil saw this ability to, hit the emotional notes as well as the fantasy and cuteness. Later on, we're going to see that Sean gets some help. He was not able to do it all on his own because of just time constraints. But I think having multiple artists, we'll get Colleen Doran and Brian Talbot coming in to help. And we'll see that in a way, this really adds to the sense of the mutability and the different aspects of these characters.
Yeah.
Last thing, on Twitter, you mentioned like this one wonderful image of Matthew the Raven and wanting to.
What are you going to do about it, boss?
I have to say, I think the best thing would be a collection of Matthew the Raven tattoos done in all these different artist styles.
I may do that after, like, when we finish, as like a celebration of what we've done here, is just get all the Matthew the Raven. I have to say, like, my favorite Matthew the Raven is still the one where he's got the balloon in his beak and he's running off, But yeah, I love
Kelly Jones.
Oh, Kelly Jones, God. I love the Matthew the Raven visuals and his personality and everything about him. And just that moment, what I said on Twitter was that I read that panel where, what are you going to do about it, boss? And I just I feel that so much, like when I'm sitting there trying to figure out a problem or something's going on, that is my inner voice being like, yeah, are you going to do something about it? Because if you're not going to do anything about it, shut up, right? And I just kind of have that in my head, and it's really neat. I love to have that representation in one panel.
Well, I've never, like Barbie will later admit, that she has trouble committing to the permanence of a tattoo as an expression of her identity. I've just discovered that there are these things, ephemeral tattoos. They're real tattoos made out of very biodegradable, all natural inks that fade within a year.
Interesting. Yeah, I have a problem with that too, because I always feel like if I had chosen tattoos in my 20s that were still on my body now, I don't know that I would necessarily feel, like that. I have a friend, Joshua Unruh, who's my co-host on In the Gutter, which is our comics book podcast that we do together. He has told me a million times, he's like, just do it. Just get it done. It's just art. It's art on your body. It's fine. You don't have to worry about it. And when you start, you just keep getting more. And then eventually it grows as a whole curation of images that represent you in time. And then it doesn't feel like you've got this one thing, And I'm like, yeah, that's definitely something to think about. But I still do not have a tattoo, but I keep thinking about it. And Sandman makes me want to get tattoos.
Okay, so here's the thing for me. I am a person who has spent a lifetime getting and growing out bangs.
Yes.
And so I assume, because it's not just the image, it's the placement. I don't know. Here's my thought. I've noticed there's a place in Brooklyn, which is close to me.
Yeah.
I figure, what if we commit for a year, and then if we love the tattoos, we could always have it be permanent.
We can always get it again.
You want to go get matching?
Let's do it. Oh my God, let's totally do it.
Ephemeral tattoos.
Let's totally do it. Yes, we'll put it up on TikTok or something. The experience, me and Alisa in the city. That'd be awesome. Okay, one of the other things that I absolutely love here is Wanda, right? And just to give everybody a heads up, Wanda is a transgender woman, and so there are a lot of issues with the discussion of that representation within stories. And I think that Elise and I had a conversation about it. And I think that what we're going to do is we're going to let the story finish. And then we're going to talk about overall how those issues are addressed. In this opening issue, I was like, wow, that's amazing. That she is absolutely treated as a woman, which is what she is. And the text acknowledges that. There are people within the text, characters in stories are not always perfect. And it's good that we have representation of people who are not understanding that is this reality. That is our reality, is Wanda is a woman. And I absolutely like it. So far, I love it. I think we should wait until we get to the end. So there are a lot of transgender issues that we're going to be, and definitely issues of identity and all of that. That's going to get super crunchy. I anticipate in Game of You. Looking forward to having all of those discussions. But the discussion of transgender representation, Alisa and I, as straight women, do not feel really qualified to say how well this is done. Everything, but we will be having discussions with people who are qualified to talk about that towards the end. So what we're going to ask you to do is what we're going to do, which is we're going to set that aside. We're going to talk about the story. We're going to work through the story, and then we're going to have a good discussion that really dives into all of this stuff. But immediately, I have to say, I absolutely loved Wanda. I loved the way that she was represented. I loved that she wasn't a perfect little princess human being, that on the subway, she's kind of mean and dismissive to this poor woman who is afraid of dogs, who is, clearly in a state of needing assistance and asking for help on the subway. And I really love the way that, that she is allowed to be a full expression of human, and we're not making her perfect because we're like, oh, let's tiptoe around. People are fully human, and fully human means that you don't always behave in the societally approved, like, perfect way. But I also love the way that she kind of addresses the compassion fatigue there, right? That, like, if I felt everything for everybody who's got a problem in this city, I wouldn't be able to leave my house, Really love that. I really love when, Barbie says, Alvin, that's your real name. She says, Wanda's my real name, Barbie baby. Alvin's just the name I was born with. Hell yes. Love it.
Yes. And also, though, Wanda doesn't get pissed off. She understands that, this is not ill intention, but Barbie doesn't understand. And I think, again, we talked a little before about how much does one do a close reading? And, all of you English majors out there know that a close reading means you only limit yourself to the text and not to authorial statements of intention. And by the way, Dumbledore's gay. But, if it's not in the text, then you don't discuss it. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's useful to know, because this isn't, an English class, that, back in the 90s, when this was really not common, Neil did, speak to people who had firsthand experience of the transgender experience to inform him in the writing. Mm-hmm. And this was, nowadays it's become, I guess, what do you call it? Better preferred practice, or what is the term? I'm losing my mind. But in the 90s, especially with a monthly comic, I don't think that was that was not assumed that that's what everyone was doing.
Right. So, he did then what we advise people to do now, and which still people are like, what? I have to talk to somebody with that experience in order to be able to write about them. And you have to be willing to do the work to unpack so many things that are, like, installed in us from the time, like I was talking about the Barbie indoctrination, right? That's just one of a million indoctrinations that we have. And so generally I like to let a text talk for itself, right? At the same time, I think that we are at a point culturally where we are just beginning to learn how to embrace things in a complex way, right? How to see that nothing is one thing or the other thing. And let me tell you, a Game of You, where we have half a chessboard face, where we have all of these split identities, where we have all of these worlds that are, like crashing into each other, is such a wonderful space to have a conversation about complexity. I mean, I do a lot of work with Joss Whedon stuff, right? And Joss Whedon has recently been discovered to be a person with a lot of problems dealing with his own power and all of that kind of stuff. And when it comes down to it, like, my response to that has always been, A, there's more than one person working on this stuff. B, the material itself is, its own thing. And if that speaks to you, then you should engage in it, and when you buy stuff that's like Buffy or whatever, it's going to everybody who worked on that, like everybody who gets residuals from it. And a lot of those people are the victims. So I don't want to, like, deny them their money, after what they put up with. Bottom line is, you really need to be able to look at things complexly. And I think that we, especially in American culture, which is what I can speak to, truly, truly struggle with that, with not seeing everything as a binary that is either one thing or another. So yes, generally I like to let the text speak for itself. I do think that impact is more important than intent, but I don't think that means that intent doesn't matter. Like, we have to embrace all of these things. I love that Neil spoke to people with this actual experience before writing their story. That he did that in 1993 is also really impressive, and that it comes out in a way that demonstrates a lot of the things. Yeah, earlier, because this came out in 93, so he was working on it before that.
No, I think actually it was the trade came out in 93, so this is 91, 92.
Wow. Yeah,
it is so long ago that I just want to say that in those days, high-waisted jeans had absolutely no give. And I just want everyone to understand, I don't know, for the young people now wearing high-waisted jeans, sometimes there's a little give. It was understood. We didn't talk about it, but we all knew that after every freaking meal, you had to undo the top button of your jeans. That was it was accepted. I think it was. I mean, look, come at me if you think I'm wrong.
Right. So what we're saying is times were different then. But the approach to this, I'm really enjoying. I'm really appreciating. I think that we're going to have really wonderful conversations about it that can take a look both at the text and on its own and whatever impact it may have had, and the fact that things were done at this time to represent a group that was not represented well generally. Do we remember The Crying Game, which was also about this time frame, right? And to have this done with consideration and respect for that perspective, I love it. I love it.
And, the other thing that I think is interesting here is that, this was done as a commercial comic. This is before Vertigo was Vertigo. And, and it dares to have Sandman, is there in a small role. But I mean, if he was sort of not a principal player in all of these storylines, he's definitely far off. I think in Sandman King of Dreams, I wrote that if the castle is located in Moscow, this whole main story is going to take place in Uzbekistan. It's really far from the main dreaming action. And at first, we see Sandman doesn't, he sees no reason why he should be involved with the tragedies of this. Like Wanda, how much compassion can he have for everybody?
Compassion fatigue, right? I mean, I kind of love that. And here we have Sandman, to me, and I haven't read, you've talked about the horror hosts, right? And my understanding is that they introduce a story, the story happens, and they close it up at the end, But here we have Sandman coming in sort of in the middle, giving a little context, having this conversation with Matthew. And then why should I do anything about it? Like these little islets of dream, they come, they go, they die, they live, this is how it works. And I find that such an interesting kind of space this is Sandman. This is a Sandman comic. And yet, as often as not, maybe more often than not, so far, we have seen these stories not necessarily be about Morpheus. Morpheus, it's about the dreaming and it's about the people interacting with the dreaming, but it's really not about him. He's just sort of watching. So I find him interesting as a watcher, and somebody who we will visit to give context. But it's not really his story. I think that's really kind of neat.
Yeah, and I think you do gain something as well. In A King of Dreams, I wrote, it's easy to demystify a hero. Just keep him on stage too long.
Yeah, I love that. And that's the thing, is that he does maintain his mystery. And especially after having read this, issue, looking at that cover again where we've got the cat just sort of sitting there in the middle, just kind of watching everything, keeping an eye on stuff. And why should I do anything, right? Why should I interfere? This is how it goes, right? Such an interesting perspective. And then you've got, of course, Barbie, who Wanda in the beginning calls Princess Barbie. Absolutely love that, And we've got Barbie, whose heart is completely out to this woman who's afraid of dogs. And then that woman, of course, runs into Martin Tenbones, and that's her worst nightmare. Her heart goes out to Martin Tenbones, who she can barely remember from these dreams she hasn't been having for a couple of years. All of that, I think, kind of comes together to set up a story that I think is going to be more complex, more nuanced, lots of chewy stuff to talk about. I'm real excited.
And you caught something really interesting about the I don't like dogs lady. She's always called the I don't like dogs lady.
Right.
She's been discussed. So you pointed out that she's repeating, I'm scared of dogs. I don't like dogs. I don't like dogs, which is very unusual in comics.
Right.
And I took that as, she's caught in a moment, the way traumatized people often are. Mm-hmm. She's caught in this moment. She's repeating it almost as a reminder and a warning to herself. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, she gets, confronted by the hugest dog of all time. The thing that's interesting about this is, well, two things for me. One is, Martin Tenbones talks about the people who are killing him as frightened people. Yeah. He is aware that, she's a frightened person without a weapon, but, the cops are frightened too. There are a lot of frightened people in this world, Martin Tenbones was saying. And the idea that frightened people can be dangerous people is in here. But also the I don't like dogs lady was actually based on a real person. Neil encountered her on the underground in England, and she really freaked out at the sight of a puppy on someone's lap.
Well, and I mean, I love that because we do have that discussion about compassion. Right? Because the fact is that, like, for all of Barbie's compassion for this woman, she does give her a little bit of money, but it doesn't make a difference in what she's going through, and this woman, like, to say, I don't like dogs, I'm scared of dogs, I don't like dogs, all of that to be repeated again, like in a form that prizes, I think, efficiency as one of its main, things that it does. Like, comic books need to be efficient. There's so much so when words are repeated, when something is repeated over and over and over again, I feel like that is incredibly meaningful. And to have her caught in this traumatic moment, to be someone who is representative of fear, and then we've got these two sides, like empowered fear, where you've got police with, weapons who are, pointing them all at this dog, right? And disempowered fear, and how those, kind of express themselves. Yes, empowered fear is extremely dangerous because what people do when they are afraid is not necessarily always reasonable. So I really do kind of like love that repetition, even though it feels like it goes against the innate efficiency of comic book storytelling. That if in comic book storytelling they're repeating something, it's important. So I kind of liked that. And it just, all of it I thought was really neat. And then we get to the end where we have George eating a bird, a bird that looks a little bit like Matthew. I got to say, I was a little bit upset because, Matthew is my bird. I love Matthew. Yeah, it is creepy, and we have the people in this land talking about the children of the cuckoo, right? And what that means, we just know that they're dangerous, we know. But when we see George's face as he swallows this bird, and it
feels like a consensual. But it's like a consensual swallowing. It's not like the bird's fighting him. Yeah. The bird's just like,
the bird's like,
this is where I go.
I guess this is how it's going to be. Right. And it's so much. Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, the intense creepiness of that calls into question not just what is George, but what is that bird,
Mm-hmm. Oh, God.
It's, I think it's a crow. I wish I could find my script. I don't have the original script for that one. Mm-hmm. So, Neil, if you're listening...
He'll correct us.
I looked through the scripts. I couldn't find the script to that one.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a black bird, right? But a black bird is, feels like Matthew to me in every context. And so interesting because we have all these dualities of existence. Does it mean something? Is it about Matthew? The ingesting of a dream. I mean, we see that bird originally. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's also, I mean, a whole different brand of bird. There's cuckoos. And I don't know if Americans are as familiar with what cuckoos really are. So I just
know about the clock.
Okay, so you know what? Let me take, this isn't in our script, but I should probably take a moment.
Absolutely.
So my kids are half English. Their dad is British. And in England, you have cuckoos. And I've actually seen a cuckoo in a nest. It is so freaking weird. Basically, the cuckoo goes around and it lays its egg in other birds' nests. And that egg is bigger and that chick is bigger. And when it hatches, it eats all its siblings.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's not real siblings, right? They are the not biological
siblings. It eats the other
siblings.
babies, yes.
It eats the other babies. And so, well, does it eat? Wait, you know what? I may be wrong. It may not eat the other babies. I'm wrong. It shoves them out of the nest. And just by being the biggest, loudest one, it gets more food than the others. So the parents, I'm sorry, it doesn't eat them. It just, that is me thinking in Sandman terms, but it does end up crowding out all the others. So the cuckoo is the, it's the bird that is not, it has taken over. It's an invasive. And what's really interesting is from that we have the word cuckold. A cuckold in old terms was a man whose wife had cheated on him, and therefore his children might not be his children.
So interesting. I love the etymology.
Birdology. What is bird? God, my daughter would know.
I don't know. Yeah, but I love that.
But so there's a lot of bird stuff.
Right. So how did the cuckoo get in the clock is what I'm curious about. How did this be a representation that people wanted, letting them know what the hour was every hour?
I think it is that distinctive cuckoo sound, which is, I think, how the bird got its name. It is named for its call. I'm not sure how it became crazy. But, this might be a nice moment for us to go into Lucien's library.
Yes, I think the timing, no pun intended, is perfect for that. We'll go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be back with Lucien's library in just a minute.
Okay, welcome back. So here we are in Lucien's library, where we discuss esoterica, Easter eggs, Hanukkah afikomen's, discussions that include spoilers, and any little bits of cool tidbits that have remained clinging to the dustbin of my mind.
I love it. This is always my favorite part of the whole discussion because I get to just listen to you talk about stuff that I had no idea about.
Well, these days, I do cheat to get my memory going. I look at High Bender's stuff. I look at the boards to see if I've written anything. I did not on the Game of You boards. I had no notes to myself, to my future self. So, but here are some things. Minor characters becoming major players. I think one of the things we've discussed with Neil is how you get the feeling that even a minor character, like I don't like Dogs Lady, feels like someone with a backstory.
Yeah.
But here we're actually getting the fuller stories with characters who were featured in other storylines. Barbie we've discussed, but Foxglove is Donna I'm having a Kavanaugh. I'm suddenly having a brain fart, which would be spelled Faughtrt. But anyway, she was the lover of Judy from the diner in the 24 Hours storyline.
Nobody's ever going to forget 24 Hours, man.
And by the way, this is also a very compressed timeline story. This all does take place in about 24 hours. Of course, lots of issues. But I think it's interesting that we are getting that, and it's part of what gives the sense of the Sandmans being such a dense and nuanced universe. I think at one point, Paul Levitz talked about this being something that the science fiction writer Zelazny does really well. And so, it's like Neil Zelazny's very well. Or
I like it. I like it as a verb. So that's awesome. So Foxglove is Donna, who was Judy's lover. And of course, we had Rose as a background character in 24 Hours, who ends up becoming, of course, the central character for the whole of Doll's House. I love that.
Well, so the other behind the scenes thing I can talk about here is the game of titles.
Yes.
So this I had to go into High Bender to remind myself. So originally, Neil wanted to call this storyline Inside of Your Heart, which is a Velvet Underground song title. Karen thought it sounded too surgical. I don't remember that. I do remember Neil discussing the title The Bimbos of Night, which Karen nixed. So once both of those previous titles were nixed, Neil said he got kind of remembering the ghost of a memory of a 1965 spy novel called The Game of X by Robert Sheckley. This may have come to his mind. He was a fan of Robert Sheckley's work, but I was working and talking with Neil, and he was aware that I am Robert Sheckley's daughter. And so he thought of that Game of X, and so this was originally going to be The Game of You. And then Dave said, too many characters. And so it became A Game of You. Also, there are chapter titles, and so this is Slaughter on Fifth Avenue, which Neil had said was a mashup on playing on musical theater titles like Lullabies of Broadway and Slaughter on 10th Avenue.
Oh, neat. I didn't see the title for the chapter. I just saw chapter 1. So it was Slaughter on Fifth Avenue?
I think it is written on that first panel where you see, maybe it's removed
maybe I missed
later versions where Barbie is lying asleep
I'll have to
her
take
bed
a look.
on her stomach.
I might have missed it because I love those titles that give us again names, identity. That applies to more than people. That can apply to the story. And I love too that you being a part of this, and then your dad is kind of a part of it. I love that. That's such a cool thing. That makes me really happy. All right, so now I have a question, and since we are in Lucien's library, if I'm going to ask any questions that have anything to do with possible spoilers, I usually try to save it for this. But I was very interested in this idea of who Murphy is, right? We have a few references to Murphy as like a god or some kind of empowered individual. And his name is Murphy Wilkinson. And then we have Wilkinson, who is the trench-coated, vaguely rat-ish character with the press hat. And they call him Wilkinson. And so I was just a little bit confused.
I think that was a misreading. I think it's not Murphy Wilkinson. It's just Murphy.
Oh, so maybe he was saying for the love of Murphy, Wilkinson, and I didn't see the comma in the elaborate calligraphic font. Yes, that is entirely likely. Now it makes more sense to me. Because I was like, is he like related to the god? And is Murphy a god? Like Murphy is such you're looking at this land, this we've got Martin Tenbones and these characters, Luz and Pinadu, right? Yeah, Pinadu. So we got all these like really high fantasy names, and then we got Murphy and we got Wilkinson, and I'm like, okay, this is an interesting like sort of mashup of unexpected elements.
Wilkinson's kind of like that World War II cynical, James Garner, a young James Garner could have played him had the young James Garner been a rat. James Garner always played these cynical characters who had interesting nuances to them. I did think, by the way, of another. So yes, with Murphy, we will see more. It's that World War II reference in part, but yeah. Well,
all right, I'm putting my money down that Murphy is another dreamer. We'll see. We shall see. But I realized, I have another behind the scenes thing to say. Okay, so not so long ago, maybe a month or so ago at Symphony Space, Neil was interviewing George R.R. Martin. And so I bought tickets for Matthew, my Raven son, and myself. My now adult Raven son. And afterwards we had a chance to go back and meet George R.R. Martin, which was just really exciting to me. So I'm clutching this
mammoth book that came with the price of entry. And Neil introduced, and I should say this took place, it started around 6, so this is maybe around 8. And I'm getting to meet George R.R. Martin. I started to read Game of Thrones back in the 90s when nobody, knew that how big it was going to be.
Yes.
And Neil starts to tell a story about who I am. He says, let me introduce you to Alisa Whitney. She was my assistant editor on the Sandman. And, it's a funny story because I was mentioning something about Robert Sheckley in this book, the Game of X. And she said, what do you think of Robert Sheckley as a writer? And I said, well, I think he was brilliant in the early part of his career in the 50s and 60s with the short stories. And then increasingly, I don't know if it was drugs or what, but he just became too, postmodern, deconstructing everything as he wrote it. And I said, he's my father. And Neil said, oh, my God. And I said, no, I'm in complete agreement. So anyway, George R.R. Martin listens to, I should say my father didn't raise me, although I was raised by his short stories. I only got to know him after the age of 14. But anyway, at the end of this whole story, George R.R. Martin is looking at me with the unmistakable look of a person whose blood sugar is plummeting.
Oh, no.
And he says, Neil, we've got to get to dinner now. And I thought, oh God, this is, I didn't register on George R.R. Martin and I totally get this because when I am hungry and after a reading like that,
it's so exhausting doing public events. Yeah.
And all I would want to do is, and it must be really hard because everybody wants to have their, intense people moment with you. And instead, George R.R. Martin was just thinking, oh, please, a little protein, a little carbohydrates. Help me, Murphy, help me, Wilkinson. And I'll mention the other thing. I think I've mentioned this on Twitter, but I think there's only, Merv Pumpkinhead sweeping up the remains of Twitter these days. So who knows who saw it. So during that conversation, George R.R. Martin said, writing is such a difficult career because you can be going great guns 1 year or 2 years and then another year not. It's a career for people who feel ready to gamble, who are willing to gamble.
Yep.
And then Neil said, willing to gamble on yourself.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? I love that.
I thought that was cool. Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, in that wonderful moment, I love that. Let's go ahead and talk about our favorite art. What is your favorite art from this issue?
Oh gosh. My favorite art, I think, it's got to be Martin Tenbones. I don't know why. Just that, I love Martin Tenbones so much. The great mythic dog. I am a hugely dog person.
Yeah.
And, and his stalwart heroicism. And not that I would want a tattoo of the wounded Martin Tenbones on any part of my anatomy, but I do love it deeply.
Oh,
how about you?
He's such a sweet and kind. Yeah, Martin Tenbones, when he comes in and he's all, talking about frightened people and having empathy for the people who are murdering him in that moment. Just incredible and so dedicated to the princess. I love all of that. For me, artwork, it's Sandman and Matthew hanging out, seeing how it's all going to go, giving some context. And those pages too are just like, they're so beautiful with the shades of blue and purple and the way that everything with them is kind of this calm, subdued sort of thing where everything else is very bright and very, kind of like active in the moment. I love the conversation between them. I love the relationship between them, and the art on those pages I think is just incredible. How's about the story? What do you think is your favorite part of the story?
Oh gosh, there's a few different. I wanted to say about Martin Tenbones and Barbie that part of the thing I always felt about that moment where he's calling on her as his princess is that when people see us as more, we become more. Yeah, that there is that our friends and our intimates are intimate mirrors of us. And in his calling on her as a source of inspiration and strength, it is beginning to transform her. And like one of my favorite quotes from this issue is her just saying, sometimes I look in the mirror and I don't recognize me. And so, and this is, it's been an uncomfortable transformation, but it's, she's going to come into her fuller sense of self. Mm-hmm. But I also just really do love that last image of, George ingesting or reabsorbing the psychic bird. And I have to say that, before I knew the rest of this, that's just such a cliffhangery and yet satisfying twist.
Oh, yeah, I have to agree. I think that is absolutely my favorite part of the story because it does this wonderful thing. I wouldn't necessarily call it a cliffhanger as so much as it is like this revelation of what it is that we're facing. We've been talking about the children of the cuckoo, and here we have this character who is, like out of everybody in the house where they're all part of this community, they're all really tight. Clearly Wanda is not that comfortable around George. George is, kind of distant and whatever. And sometimes that can just be somebody who's socially awkward and you kind of let that go. Like maybe he's going to be the guy that's socially awkward that comes in and becomes the new Martin Tenbones or something. But then you see him go in and, eat the bird and go from this kind of benign little, expression that you're not really sure if he's really a bad guy or if he's just misunderstood or like who he is. And we see his identity come out in full force and know who our antagonist is. Having an active antagonist is so great. And the thing is that you don't need to have your antagonist on the first page. Here we kind of do, like very, very early, but we don't know that this is the antagonist who is active in this world, who is going to be coming after Barbie. And then when that happens at the end of the first issue, I feel the story just snap. It's like, here are all the pieces. We know what's going on. Once again, hello, efficiency of storytelling in comics is unparalleled, I love all of it. And it was that moment where I was like, all right, the people telling this story know what they're doing. I'm strapped in. I'm in. I can't wait, So for me, like that was such a wonderful exclamation point at the end of this story. Absolutely loved it. Completely invested. So excited to be here talking about this again with you and being back talking about the comics. I love it.
I am too. And, it's funny. We've had all the little squeakinesses of, trying to remember how things are done and my barking puppy. I have an Icelandic sheepdog puppy, 8 months old now. And for those who don't know, she is in love with barking. She loves the sound of her own voice. She too should have a podcast because she's always saying, barf, 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 barf.
Yes. So you may have heard a little bit of commentary from Gilda in the background. We will definitely ask her what she thinks about the death of Martin Tenbones as somebody who is more closely related to Martin Tenbones than any of us.
She looks a little like a mini Martin Tenbones. She's got that colored. I think she looks, it's funny. She too, she's a very pretty, cute looking blonde and you could mistake her because she's really incredibly tough and actually a little Viking. So yeah, she,
I dig it. I didn't mean to say that. That sounds like a pun with dogs, but no, I didn't mean it that way.
If you've enjoyed this insane discussion and would like to join in, Patreon supporters can chat with us and each other through our Patreon Discord channel.
To find out how you can support Chipperish Media, visit patreon.com/Chipperish. Other ways to show your support: write a great review on Apple Podcasts, tell your friends about the show, or travel from one state of existence to another and let us observe the consequences.
This episode of Endless was edited by Chipperish content editor Jack Cram. Jack, I said I would never leave your side, not ever, not while I lived. Thanks so much for joining us. We will be back next time with Sandman Volume 5, A Game of You, Chapter 2. Until then, the Skerries are distant islets in the shoals of dream. They live, they die. They come, they go. Why should I do anything about it?